Sleep Token just dropped their fourth studio album, Even in Arcadia, recently, and in this video I will be giving you my thoughts and opinions and a review of the album, as it's gotten a lot of mainstream hype that we haven't really seen in the metal community, and I thought that I'd weigh in on it a little bit, so let's get right into it. My expectations for this album were sky high going into it, because I've been a fan of this band for a little while, and a lot of hype has been gaining around them, as they've doubled their Spotify monthly listeners and they're topping Billboard charts left and right. So this was a real make or break album for them in terms of how the band is viewed in the music industry as a whole. And starting off the album with Look to Windward was a great start for them, as it really builds immediately, almost cinematically, with the 8-bit synth melody and layering the beautiful violins on top of it, and building up into a huge breakdown in the center. And this is where most bands would stop. But Sleep Token is not most bands, as they build it up even more with a trap beat, and then tone it down with the piano, and then immediately go back into the breakdown. And one of the most impressive things that I've seen musically all year, as these combinations of genres should not work for any other band, but Sleep Token does it so phenomenally. It all meshes so well together, and each and every single part of this song works perfectly with one another, and it sounds great. With Look to Windward, they really throw all the punches that they have right at your face immediately, all at once, as they do so many things on this track, but also keep it incredibly concise, and it flows extremely well. And I think that that's a huge risk for them to combine all the genres in one song like that, for an opener especially, as all eyes are really on that song. But I think it worked out extremely beautifully for them, and it's one of my favorite tracks on the album personally. And next, following that up, is Emergence, which was the lead single for the album, and by far the best of the three, in my opinion. As they kind of do the Sleep Token formula, it's nothing that they haven't really done before, but they start off with a trap beat, which isn't unusual for them. The syncopation in the drums was a really neat touch. I think it adds a lot to the song in terms of differentiating it from their other work. And then it builds up into the guitars once again, in the same kind of beat as the 808s, which is a really cool thought to do that. And also, it was a really cool thought to make the vocal melody into a guitar riff, which is not something that you really see all that often. And I thought it was a really cool thing for them to do, and was personally one of my favorite moments on the album as a whole. Emergence then wraps up with a very tasteful saxophone solo that really gives it that extra flair that it needs to truly differentiate it from other works that they've done, especially from Take Me Back to Eden, to which this track sounds extremely similar to. But it wraps it up in a very nice way that is different for them and mixes it up a little bit throughout the album. Next up is Past Self, which is definitely the most simple song on this album, and is the reason why a lot of people have very conflicting views, and it's a very divisive song, as they really don't do anything special here. It's a simple pop song, but they do it so extremely well. They use a sample from The Legend of Zelda, which is really cool, and it's a super catchy melody, and it's a super catchy song as a whole. Yet again, they don't really do anything all that special, but honestly, the song's a vibe, and that's all you really need for a song like that. So, after that is the track Dangerous, which features my favorite piece of rapping on the album. I wouldn't really call it rapping, but whatever. It starts off with an extremely catchy synth melody, like a lot of the tracks on this album do, and leads into a trap beat, which was my favorite trap beat on the album. And it was almost so good that when the guitars kicked in, I didn't really care. The guitars don't really add much to the song that the trap beat wasn't already doing, and I felt like the guitars on other tracks were so much better implemented that the guitars on this track just don't really hit that much for me. But I still think that the first half of it is extremely catchy, and that the guitars don't make the song worse. They just don't do anything to make it better for me, which is my really only critique for that song. And then we get into the second single off of this album, Caramel, which when it came out, I really liked this song. And not that I don't like this song anymore, but as time has gone on, it's kind of worn off on me a little bit. Because, like Caramel itself, it's almost a little too sweet. It has everything that you would want in a pop song, for better or worse. It has the reggaeton beat, which is very creative. We've seen this with bands like Knocked Loose, which implemented it much better, I would say, on the song Suffocate. Suffocate is clearly not the same track that Caramel is. But I like that they took this creative direction. I just don't think that they executed it the way that they really could have if they wanted to. This song is just really, it's just a pop song with a metal breakdown at the end. And to be honest, the breakdown at the end was a little bit underwhelming, to which some of the other breakdowns on this album were, like the one that we saw in Look to Windward, for example, or even some of the breakdowns in the tracks at the latter half of the album, like Gethsemane and Infinite Baths. But still, I think this song is good. I don't think that it's going to get better for me over time. It's only going to get worse. But at this point in the album, I do think that it has the best writing that we've seen on any track so far, as Vessel really gets emotional within himself and about his fans, about how he perceives fame and the stress and anxiety that he goes through every day. So I can give him props for that, but the song as a whole really is only going to get worse for me over time. Then we have the title track, Even in Arcadia, which to me sounds like something off of the Hollow Knight soundtrack, which is a great game and it has a great soundtrack. And it's another cinematic moment on this album, as it displays courage and strength, not only in its songwriting, but also its composition. And it really gives Vessel's voice a chance to shine over the piano. There's not really much else going on besides the piano, which I think is a good thing to have in an album like this, which really has a lot of impressive production, sometimes could be considered to be overproduced by some. But I feel like this is a very necessary track to really give Vessel's vocals a chance to shine with a great composition behind it. That then moves on to the song Provider, which has a more TikTok-like appeal, much like The Summoning had off of Take Me Back to Eden, as it has an R&B type beat and has more sensual vocals with lyrics that lean on the more side that The Summoning did. And this was expected to have a track like this, especially after all the success that The Summoning had on TikTok, and it's already blowing up on TikTok right now. But as for the song itself, Provider does a really great job of combining those R&B type elements with the metal guitars, as the R&B melody from the beginning kicks in with the guitars later in the track in a way that really fits and really sounds great together as a whole. This song, structure-wise, is very much similar to Dangerous earlier in the track list, but I feel like it does a much better job of combining those elements together than did Dangerous. So overall, even though that this song is more TikTokified than some of the other tracks on the album, I really like how they blended the genres together to make something that sounds super good together. Then on to the third and final single, being Damocles. This song is very similar to Caramel, as it's extremely catchy and doesn't really do much for me, honestly, and it's a huge reason why it's worn down on me a bit since first listen, as Damocles really is like your basic pop rock song. It doesn't really do anything special. It's just kind of there in the track list between all the other great tracks. But good news is, after this track, it's all phenomenal, so it can be forgiven. Then moving on to the second to last track, being Gethsemane, we start to see some things that Sleep Token has never done before. A lot of this album has felt very reminiscent to their older works, especially Take Me Back to Eden. But with Gethsemane, we see at the beginning a Midwest emo type of guitar riff that I was really excited to hear as a fan of Midwest emo music myself. And it continues to build with a huge metalcore breakdown in the middle and moving into the end with a trap beat that, upon first listen, sounded very similar to Chase Atlantic, which I've seen a lot of people also make that connection. And much like Look to Windward, Gethsemane combines these elements in a way that is very compelling and makes sense and flows together really well that not many other bands are doing right now. Finally, we have the closer, being Infinite Baths, which is really hugely characterized by the latter half of the song, with a huge, intense breakdown that continues to build upon itself at the end and eventually fades out into black, which is a good way to end the album. Could there have been a better way to end an album as emotional and as vulnerable as this one, rather than a fade out of a breakdown? Sure. But I think that it was a great way to end it, especially as someone who likes the heavier stuff that they do. The first half of this track really builds up into the super heavy second half emotionally, as it builds up in a way that feels deserved at the end, like a release of all this tension that was building up throughout the album and especially in the beginning of this song. And it wraps up in a way that is really cool for someone who is into the heavier side of their music and music as a whole. I can see how some people could want a better, more emotional ending than a fade out of a breakdown, but I think that it was a great way to end the album, and what a phenomenal album it was. Overall, this album was an emotional and musical journey of sorts for not only Vessel, but for the listener, as the listener can experience all different types of genres blended together so perfectly, with Vessel's beautiful writing and vocals throughout the entire thing. I love this album so much. I've listened to it nonstop, and I really think that this cements Sleep Token as one of the most creative and modern bands today. And I think that we can see this influence maybe 10, maybe 20 years down the line. This is what modern rock music will look like, whether you like it or not. This is the sign of a new era for modern music as a whole, especially as that they've just hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 200. This is what music's going to look like, and I'm very thankful for it. I'd give this album 9.4 out of 10. Please let me know in the comments what you thought of the album, and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching.